Hi, this is Selina Hayes with Hayes Group International. You are listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John and Pete.
That is what I'm talking about. You are fantastic. You're hosting us in your lovely oasis here in the backyard. And if there's anything that John and I love, it's an oasis. I got to give a shout to my man George, who's in town, who's our official guest host. Whenever John and I aren't both here and George is around, he always steps in. So you should check out his podcast, which is about emergency management, over at CompleteEM.com. You can say hi, George.
Hi, George.
All right, there you go. So we have Selina. Why Selina is important is she's worked overseas in very complex environments, dealing with our State Department folks, USAID, military, trying to get us more capable at creating stability, to create prosperity for people that just have no hopes, no dreams. She works to try to correct these things, and her company, the Hayes Group, which she'll tell us about, works directly with those groups, trying to create this change that we struggle with so much, that we talk about on this show quite often. And you often hear me get frustrated, especially with the USAID and Department of State, because they are so challenged by these extremely hard problems. So welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about Hayes Group.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. Hayes Group really was created out of gaps. You've heard me refer to it as seams and
Sure.
between the seams. So I have come from an eclectic background, working and seeing what State Department, USAID, DOD, NGOs, other entities, other countries have been doing in these conflict zones. We've identified, really, Hayes Group is identifying those gaps. So I think all of those organizations have great intentions. It's just that sometimes there's a lack of coordination. Sometimes there's a lack of knowledge of what each one is doing. So at Hayes Group, we are about working in between those seams and bringing, and melding those seams together to be more effective, especially for local communities.
Yeah, I found that there's a disconnect between our policy desires and advancing and accomplishing those things, and then the tactical, on-the-ground things that you have to do. And you have a multiple system problem where you have the existing system if you're in whatever country, fill-in-the-blank country, and then you also have our American system that's trying to provide these help. So in between there, for me, is a huge seam, and that's where I've done a lot of my work, is saying, Army, slow down, stop being so influential, and I'm big on creating affect over effect. Like, if I can get people to show up to their own government center, that's much more powerful than forcing the governor to go out and meet people. I want them to want to come there. Are those kind of some of the gaps that you guys do, or are you working in, because there's so many gaps and seams, what do you think your sweet spot is in terms of those things?
Information's very powerful. So, we truly believe in doing cultural assessments, and
Sure.
which, you've also been involved in. And, you bring up a really good point in that not only are there gaps between U.S. government, American, with the countries that we're working in,
Mm-hmm.
we create our own gaps. There's gaps between the COCOMs, for instance. I know we've talked about that, EUCOM, AFRICOM,
Sure.
CENTCOM. We can talk about the refugee problem, where we have refugees coming out of Syria and the Levant area into Europe. You're crossing over two different COCOMs, and then you throw AFRICOM when you have refugees coming in from Libya. What our enemies do is take advantage of those seams, and we don't seem to be able to coordinate, well enough. That's where the gaps are created. So, we're about coming up with solutions in the security realm, using the information on the ground. So from the locals. We don't just read about it on Wikipedia or, look on a Twitter feed. Our team actually is on the ground, and we work in, I would say, not so easy places, but, the people that I have on my team seem to love those areas. So that's northern Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia. We have we're looking at some opportunities in Ukraine, and then we've also looked at Syria.
Yeah, these are some of the most challenging problem sets that exist. And let me back up one time real quick and say things like COCOMs, EUROCOM, AFRICOM, just put the word command and just think about there is a general who runs that command of some kind. Maybe it's an admiral. And they run the Africa command. They run the European command. And so as these things try to work together, realize that they're separate entities, although they're all military DoD. That's just for our listeners that don't know a lot of the lingo that Selina and I might throw around. Okay, so we're talking about Syrian refugees. We're talking about multiple commands that are trying to solve this problem. And a lot of people try to solve the problem from behind a desk. You and I both know, we both agree that you have to have folks on the ground. I was doing work right outside of Sadr City in Iraq, and we had a guy a couple levels above me who was writing a paper on Sadr City and Sadrists. And I'm like, would you like me to grab any information from you? Because I can literally talk to Sadrists tomorrow. Just tell me what your questions are. And he said, yeah, no thanks. I've got this. Like, no, you don't. You don't. You're reading stuff from what source are you reading it? I'm going to go have a dude talk to people. And if you deny that, so I've had commanders tell me, and I'm sure you've had the same thing happen. I've had commanders tell me, I don't need someone to tell me what I already know. I need the ground truth. I know what to do with my resources. I can make changes. I can impress people to do things differently, but I've got to have real granular level truth so I can understand what my organization is doing. Working in those kind of spaces, though, does aggravate people because I find that I work in kind of a negative space where I present things. I'm like, this is what you're creating. This is what I'm observing. And I don't think this is what your outcome is intended to be. Do you find that you guys work in sort of a similar negative space where a lot of the things that you find in these scenes isn't what the organization wants to hear? The commander maybe does, but the organization struggles with it because it frankly it's bad news.
Yeah, and I think also we've all got our own priorities. So what a priority might be for one of someone in the local community, it may be, and most probably is very different from the priorities of the U.S. government,
right?
Priorities of private organizations that are operating in the same space. And it's okay to have different priorities. It's just how we all work together to, achieve the best results. I think, you touched on a point which, I think it's a nice segue, in talking about what's the secret sauce of Hayes Group. We are taking a very unique approach to some of these problem sets, and we look at networks that are unique, also not so unique, but one that I don't think that we've touched on enough, especially from the DoD aspect, and I like to refer to it as the other 50%.
Oh, right.
Right, which is women networks.
Sure.
I don't mean women issues. A lot of people get confused with,
yes,
women issues. I'm not talking about a period.
It's
like we all
I'm glad you brought that
right.
up because I was going to go there and it always makes me uncomfortable.
Right. There's two common threads I see with women around the world, and that is that we all tend to gossip in some capacity, and
right.
we also all have a period.
Yeah.
So there's some commonalities there. What I've seen in some of my work is engagement with the other 50%. And it's amazing how much information women have in these communities and how much real control that
right.
they have. If we're looking, throw some of our little keywords out here, phase zero and, gray zone. If you're only looking at one half of the population or reading one side of the book,
right.
I think not only are you ineffective, but it's also dangerous because you're not getting the full story from the community. Also, I'll say with women in these communities and in conflict zones of where we work in, we're the first ones to die, be raped, kids are taken away from us.
Be abandoned.
Yeah. So, I mean, pick any one of those things. But, we're the last ones at the solution table.
Right.
And so I often say, how about asking some of these women, what their solution would be? And I think you may be surprised. The other thing I'll say is women in these conflict zones and women on the other side being our enemy, we often see them as being victims. And I just don't buy into that. I think women have a choice.
Sure.
And I think my sisters on the other side actually choose to be combatants.
Yeah, and they don't have to necessarily be the quote-unquote traditional enemy. They might be just the enemy because they're ignored. You give them a voice, and they have a lot of influence. I've worked, and I'm passionate, and we've discussed this. I'm passionate about this end of it and getting it right because it is so critical. We often come in with packaged, pre-thought-out American solutions that are clearly not possible. It's great intention, very educated people, but you can't go in and flip on a switch and say, now females are educated here. From my point of view, what I've done is take that goal, that policy, and work on the individual tactical steps. So one of the things I'm going to do, and we wrote a paper, my research partner, Richard Leday, and I wrote a paper on female empowerment in conflict zones. And you have to start with, one, the commander, the U.S. commander, the DOD person, the DOS person on the ground has to work against their normal cultural requirements to allow these things to happen. So you have to address that person. You also have to address the family or tribal leaders and find out where you can actually do this work within their norm. Because if you just come in and destroy their norm, you create more conflict. So you find leaders that are like, yeah, I would like you to engage our women. Here's the appropriate way to do it. Here are the things that we think are important. And now you have a conversation. And now you have a legitimate entry where you're allowing the male leaders they are the government in so many places where there's conflict. They represent decisions and court rulings. If you undermine their importance, you will not have their support. And that's dangerous the minute we leave that village and those women are left behind to deal with the problem that we've created that we have no idea about. So we have to engage those men to find where we can legitimately do work. And then that's where the work starts, and you can expand it out. And then also, obviously, talk to the women and find out those key things. What is important? What are the things that we should be doing? What are the sweet spots? Does that follow with what you've seen? And it's okay to push back if you've seen something different because we've been in different areas and everything. But
I think that part of it, and we've engaged with the male side of the house in Iraq and Afghanistan. One of the things that I think in our approach, and again, we all talk phase 0 and,
right.
Left of crisis. Often, we're really not thinking long term. We've been reactive in some of our approaches and say, we're not going to put you in danger. And this I say to my military folks that I know, you guys do a great job of knocking down a door. I mean, you can kick down the door like nobody's business. I could probably try and kick down a door, but it's going to mess up my high heels. Right. But I will tell you that most of the time, the door is open for me.
Yeah.
I don't need to kick down a door. Right. Now, what are the implications of kicking down a door? I think we've seen that, and it's no fault of our military. I love some Marines.
Sure.
When you have a woman, it's usually the woman that's left because they know when Marines are coming in. The woman's there on the other side of the door with her 4-year-old son. When we as American forces go and knock the door down, right, the 4-year-old boy, when he becomes a 14-year-old boy,
absolutely,
what he wants to do to the Marines that knock down the door.
Yeah. And this is where I talk about where our well-intentioned ethical choices that we make flip and become destabilizers. And unless an organization like, in this case, DOD, can externally measure by having like Hayes Group or Pete go out and look at the results that you're creating, not internally, because I'm not beholden to the system. I'm beholden to the commander's ground truth. Unless you can independently measure that, you were creating instability. That's the baseline, because instability is the norm in these places. You can come in, you can build a school and say you won, and the minute you leave, that school is used for something else. It becomes something horrible. You don't have any control over it. So to get these things right, you have to have someone like the folks at the Hayes Group or the work that Rich and I would do. It's that complicated. The people that go home from the Department of State or USAID are like, we are helping people, and they're not. And it's such a challenging message to get across. How do you get that message across to the folks that aren't the commanders, that look and say, no, I'm really helping people, but in reality, there's chaos left?
Yeah, I think it goes back to priorities. Again, I think we're all very selfish, and we all want our priorities to be number one.
Right.
But we need to understand, the long term. There's a short term strategy, and granted, I am all for if it requires a battalion of Marines, you know what, so be it.
Right.
We also need to be more effective in our long term strategy. And again, I refer back to the other 50%. We're raising men.
Yes.
Women raise men. And so as a boy becomes a man, what are some of those influences? And usually it's the mother. All the studies, I don't need to repeat them, have been around. You keep that boy with the mother, he's going to be more influential in the community. He's going to, participate more so than some of these boys and children that have been orphaned, unfortunately, through humanitarian disasters and through health reasons, or through the recruitment of ISIL.
Yeah. One of the things that I've found, we actually had a guy named Rob Bell, who's a mega church founder, has this wonderful following of people that are trying to do right things, and he's found similar things through his dealings with people in instability zones and just people in general, where there's an infrastructure of the mind, and if you understand what is going on in that group's internal, like what their reality looks like, to kind of almost see the world through their eyes, you can start to find ways to accomplish your goal simultaneously with what's compatible and allowable for them. We can't start on 15 if they're on -2. Like, we have to have a better orientation. At the same time, part of what that looks like, from my experience, is a lot of these folks are just simply in survival mode, especially the women. And it's terrible. You hear these stories. I call them the tales of woe, and I have this book of woe in the back of my head that I cannot go reread because it's tragic. And you know how it is, especially in a lot of the Islamic countries that I've been to. If a woman is just perceived as being anything other than pure, she's a whore, and she is shunned, and her kids are. It's a hugely dangerous and exploitable opportunity for folks from ISIL or Boko Haram or anything, because these people literally have no tomorrow, nothing. And that's a big piece of why we have to deal with, and really, you and I both know, it's not the other 50%, it's like the other 65%, because a lot of the men are either absent, dead, never coming back for whatever reason. So you're talking about the bulk of the population. And I'm going to add one more piece of color to this, too, just like you talked about with Marines kicking in doors. And I, too, love Marines. I love my Tier 1 people, all that, and it's great. But if someone kicked in a door here in Coronado and came in with the military force, how much disruption have you caused, especially if it's the wrong house?
If it's the wrong house. And I've asked my own son how he would feel, in talking with my own children about this. And we won't be explicit here on, but he would remember it, and he would want to take action. And I think that's normal for anyone, anywhere. You're right. So I think we all say, put yourself in someone else's shoes, or empathy, or whatever you want to call it, I think should be a larger part of our strategy. The other part too is that I would say, we seem to get wrapped up in women's issues and women networks. Again, I'm not talking about, women's issues. And I agree with, more education for women and healthcare, and okay, that's all great. But the power of women networks, of how we network with each other, and what comes through our space, and how we can get a better handle of that. And then including that within our own mission planning within the military, I think is critical. Get more women, not necessarily in Kevlar, because we're not about dressing women up to look like a guy.
Right. Yes, you're big on this. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Be feminine. Right.
Right. I do not look good in camis. They just don't fit that real well for me. And, and I've got to do some high heels. So, but it's embracing actually what makes us different and what we can actually bring to the table and make mission planning more effective. So that those are some of the things that that we're looking at. We're also looking at, I know you and I talked about the refugees a little bit,
right?
And how we can better engage with these communities. Again, I see this as being a long-term struggle, and one that I think that we've got a very small window to get in front of, and if we don't do it sooner rather than later, I think we're going to start seeing more of the attacks that have happened in Europe. And it's very easy to blame refugees, what people don't realize is that these people are coming from kind of middle class backgrounds
Right.
and they're used to having nice things like you and I.
Mm-hmm.
They've just come from a situation where unfortunately they have no more house or food, or they have nothing, so they choose to get on a boat
Yeah.
and travel thousands of miles just to have a better life.
They not only choose to travel, they understand that, again, day-to-day survival not guaranteed.
Correct.
I'm going to go and float across the Mediterranean Sea, and I hope that if something happens to me, which is quite possible, that someone will save my child. I mean, they are that desperate, and there's that in that desperation is opportunity for exploitation.
Correct.
From folks that
always.
Yeah. So
At a number of different levels. I tell folks it's not even, terrorism. It gets a lot of press. It's marketed in a fantastic way, and it of course keeps us all employed.
Mm-hmm.
And that of course we're all very thankful for. However, there are so many other things that can go wrong. There's exploitation of children,
Sure.
the trafficking of children, and the tracking of women that can, have detrimental effects. I think people turn a blind eye to that. The terrorism, as I said, it's kind of a little sexy and, and everyone can relate to that, 9/11.
Right.
But there are so many other things, in so many ways, these people and others are being exploited.
Yeah.
And so I think that's concerns that we have to look at as well, even though, the idea of terrorism and security keeps us all very well employed.
Yeah, well, and we have to pay attention to those things, clearly. And I think we both agree, like, there is a place, and a very important one in those worlds, but understanding, even from our own perspective, what it would like to become a refugee. You like middle class, like I can go out and get Starbucks whenever I want. If your ability to earn any money, if numbers of people in your neighborhood, people in your family, your immediate family, were dead. Just imagine like when someone in your family gets cancer and how that waylays the family, and it causes stress and sometimes divorce and all these other things come from it. If that was 1/10 of what your family had to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and all the families around you had this, and you were getting uprooted from wherever it is that you live, and you have no control over how you eat, what you eat, where your money's going to come from, you're completely dependent upon somebody else. It's incredibly challenging for that family day to day just to stay. How do you not have a tremendous PTSD problem where you just don't know where the next shock is coming from, and you just stay shocked for years and years and years to get in front of some of that? Because that person, again, is so exploitable, so fragile, angry, legitimately angry at whatever it is. And if that anger gets pushed towards some kind of terrorist attack type thing, and the hopelessness is, it's not hard to see how quickly someone who 6 months ago had a viable, productive life is all of a sudden now, front page news because of some ridiculous thing. That has nothing to do with Islam or anything else. That has everything to do with tragedy that was completely out of their hands.
Yeah, and I think it's those are some of the programs that we're working on, and it's how do you engage with these people and integrate them either into the communities that they're now a part of, because they're not going back.
Right.
Let's be honest here.
They're not
going
Right.
back. They are going to be woven in to the fabric of whatever society they finally end up in. We can either keep saying, keep them in camps, and then you start raising, those 4-year-old boys become 14-year-old boys, and they're still not educated or engaged in the community.
Right.
They don't feel part of anything. Or it can start, being effective, really getting into a phase 0, left of crisis type mentality. I don't think that we have all the answers. I think, it's going to be a little bit of trial and error, but I do think that we need to take more of a strategic approach to some of these issues that will become very large issues.
And there will be some security issues with that. There will be some people that turn left. You have to understand that there is an element to that. We talk about vetting people. I've vetted people. I am not a magician. I will talk to a person and my meter starts on no way in hell you're going to come in, but it quickly goes to yes, and I try to find a middle ground. And if I think that person is trying to make a better life, I want them here. I would be proud to have someone who pursues. How many times have we seen the American dream of, I came and I had $6 or I had 7 spoons or whatever ridiculous story it is, and then they make something out of themselves. I want to create those stories. But again, I'm not a magician.
Right.
So I can vet all I want. Some people are going to come by, and they're going to be, a lot of them are going to be extra legal. These are not, like you said, solutions to a big problem that work perfectly. There will be people that have to work outside of the law or against the law to survive. And it takes a long time to solve these problems, but they are not going back to Syria. They are not going back to whatever village has been destroyed or anything. They have to create new lives. And again, you have to look at perspective of, if I had to create a new life from nothing, with nothing, what would you do? You know, and how angry would you be, and how scared would you be? It's an exceptionally challenging thing. It's so getting all of that and wrapping all that up and putting a bow on it. It doesn't have to be grand solutions. It can be very simple things that give these people some hope, just a step forward, you know, and then figure out where the next simple, like, what is the most easiest thing that we can help a refugee do each day just to get a little better, you know, so they have some successive wins, and there's actually the ability to start to dream about what maybe could be coming. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there are people on the ground doing great things, and you know, there are a number of different, you know, approaches. Of course, education, you know, health. I often say you can't do anything if you're not healthy.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same in this country.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't have your health, you're pretty much.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete Turner.
And if you like the show,
Do us a favor.
yeah, share it.
That's the biggest thing, honestly.
All your social media outlets, all your friends, let them know the ones that you like.
Yeah. I mean, we make this show for you guys. If you think it's great, say so. Say so by sharing it. Say so by putting a comment in after the show.
Also, if you go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts, give us a rating, give us a review. If you think the show is great, please give us 5 stars and say so. And if you think the show really sucks, please give us 5 stars and say so.
Because, heck, we're listening.
That's right.
You can't be more approachable than us. We want to make the show better. If there's something that we're missing, let us know. That really is how you help us.
That's right. Tell us all about it. Thanks for listening.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah.
You know, that'll stop everything. So, you know, healthcare, of course, you know, you have to eat, you need all your basics. There's some human dignity elements. Again, talking with the other 50%, I call it the power of lipstick. It's amazing how, you know, most women that I've met traveling around the world, and most women enjoy dressing up. We enjoy some type of adornment. It's just who we are. It's what makes us unique. Sometimes it's just a little bit of makeup that can make the world of difference in someone's life. Sometimes it's just feeling normal for an hour, and how that, you know, brushing your hair,
Right.
how that then carries it over to your children, and how your children then, you know, see you. I think can really make, you know, people laugh at me, you know, lipstick. I'm like, really? Lipstick? And there's the story of World War II when the British soldiers went into the concentration camps, and they went in with a whole bunch of different items, and I think there was like boxes of lipstick. So they handed them out to, you know, to the Jewish women. Unfortunately, some of those women did not survive, and they found the corpses with red lipstick on.
Right.
It's very moving.
It is a great lesson, and it's one of my favorite. And I'm getting a little emotional just thinking about it, because it is such a. We want to go out in our day-to-day lives, and my grandma used to say, "I need to put my face on, doll." You know, like she wasn't gonna, and she's a grandma, like, you know, she's not hitting on men. It's just that was part of her going out. She, you know, in the house she might have on something totally different, but when we go outside, she wanted to be presentable. You know. Every person wants something like that, where like, this is who I am. I'm not going to go out without my hair brushed. But literally, like, some of these people do not have a brush or the means to get clean. If you've not taken a shower since you can't remember when, and there's no shower in your future, you have no dignity. If you strip away someone's dignity, well, now you've got someone that's completely exploitable. So this is a great lesson in the simple things that you can do to give someone the most basic things. In Bosnia, we had these guys, and this is what I started to learn, the small wins are all around you all the time. If I could give one thing for you guys, simple, like right now, I could make it happen and show up, what would it be? And the guy said, we all work outside on these houses trying to rebuild them. It'd be great if we had some sunblock. Like, sunblock? Are you kidding? We've got gallons of that stuff. And they're like, well, bring it.
Right.
That would be huge for us.
Right.
You know?
And then that little piece there, I know we were talking about this before offline, is that builds a social network.
Right.
You know, women networks, social networks, however you want to talk about it. We were talking about using tools and social media. A lot of people think that, you know, oh, that's the social network. No, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, those are just tools for us to be able to communicate. And I think we get lost in that. I think we need to look more at those social networks and how we can build those social networks and be more effective within those social networks. I know our enemy does quite well with that.
Yeah. Right.
So it's it's really the social networks that have more power than the social media tools. Now, they're great tools. You know, sometimes they're the great neutralizer. You can be anything on social media, especially for women. You know, you can get a message out there. You can have an appearance of a guy,
right,
and be pushing out messaging. You know, it may be a 15-year-old girl in the background, and that's another thing that we are saying within Hayes Group. We think the security dialogue needs to move in a direction forward and realize that the conflicts of the past, the conflicts now, they're not the same.
Okay.
Our enemy is a 15-year-old girl on Snapchat.
Right.
You know, it's a 12-year-old boy on Twitter. It's messaging. You know, it's a glossy magazine on pretty pictures, but you know, it's our enemy that's putting out the pretty pictures. That's the new battlefield. This
is one of my most crucial things it's one of the elements of what I do, and I talk about it all the time, and I hope people are sick of it because they've learned this lesson, but you have to focus on affect over effect. If I can evoke or create an evocative response, then now I can have an effect that I can control better. If you do things on social media and you can get people to come back to, even if it's with hate, now you were having a conversation from an emotional standpoint, and that moves culture. You can't do it by just sending out 1,000 messages. And if no one's listening for 1,000 messages, you aren't communicating. You're just broadcasting out. You're just creating a din. I'm really big on affect over effect. Not that you can't focus on effect, but you can think you're winning the game, like we talked about earlier, because all of these metrics have been achieved. But in reality, no one's listened, no one's moved. You know, so when I bring sunscreen out, I'm not going to hand it to the Bosniak that's there. I'm going to say, we have sunscreen for you. You have to go to the governor to get it because he's the guy and I don't care about anything else other than getting that person to get up out of their chair and go consume the government, even for one day, one tiny step. And so it's those little things where I've got that person to say, okay, I'll go to that's a communication opportunity, and you repeat it and you repeat it and you repeat it. And slowly you have a conversation, and it may not be the conversation you want, but that's where the work has started, where you are now at least engaging in talking with how do we create female empowerment? How do we create a better situation for females? And you start talking with the men, like, where is it possible? And one guy raises his hands and he's like, F you, that's not possible in my valley. Don't come here. Okay. Well, you know what? You can wait. Because the other guy's like, I want your help. I want my daughter to be an astronaut. Okay, I'm going to focus there. That guy, now you have two different emotional responses. But now I can work with either one of those. But I can't if I just say, I'm coming to your valley, I'm coming to your valley, I'm coming to your valley, and everybody's going to get this. It doesn't work.
Well, and also, too, I would caution just within that dialogue is that when we say female empowerment.
Yeah, it's a crazy term.
It is a crazy term because often we look at these communities as women not being empowered. Surprisingly enough, in a lot of these communities, women have all the power.
Absolutely.
And once you start getting behind closed doors, you realize who really is in charge. Often, I'm surprised at how many women inspire men to go and fight and get into the battle.
Yeah.
Again, I think we need to, I always caution, we always see women as being victims. And I just don't buy into that.
Right.
I think that a lot of these women in these communities are much stronger than we realize. And what we're saying at Hayes Group is part of our product. And we not only look at women, we look at these unique networks,
Right.
because there are also disenfranchised groups within societies.
Yes.
But we look at those networks and find out, okay, well, what's the dynamic here? What's really going on? What information is being passed? What's their message within the community? And often we find that the women have a very strong message and they play a certain role. And we as Westerners, Americans, whatever you want to call us, often miss that.
Sure. I'm thinking of a specific example where we were trying to learn about how do you introduce in such a conservative rural part of Afghanistan where we were, where the Taliban influence was ubiquitous. You were not going to get rid of it because it was part of the fabric of the culture. How do you engage females better? And one of the farmers said, one guy said, F you, get the hell away from me. We don't talk about that. I'm like, all right, cool. The other guy said, you know what's so funny? I got one of those radios from the government. That's a win. And we've been listening to the programming. That's a win. I cannot get that radio away from my daughter. Try as I might. Doesn't matter what I do. Because she's daddy's little girl. And that exists in every culture.
Yeah, for sure.
And so she's, not only is she empowered, she runs the thing. She really is, she makes the decisions and she has her dad wrapped around her finger. We can't lose sight of that. Those things exist. And I look for those commonalities all the time. We all need to be healthy. We all want our kids to do better than us. We all want these things. If you look for those common things that cross all culture, you're in the right area if you can find those kind of solutions.
No, agreed, for sure.
So what kind of projects are you guys working on with Hayes Group?
So we've only just started. We're actually looking at some projects in northern Nigeria, in East Kivu. I mentioned that, and also looking at work in Ukraine.
Okay.
I can't talk about a lot of them, but
sure, yeah.
But yeah, we're engaging with a couple of different entities on how we can be most effective. A lot of our work involves assessment work.
Sure.
So we'll go in and do an assessment. We pretty much do an assessment or have folks on the ground with local knowledge that can provide us with information where we can be, effective pretty much, straight off the bat. One of the unique things that Hayes Group brings is that I do like to have folks that are on the ground. So we all travel. We all go to these places. As I said, we don't get our information just from Wikipedia and, Twitter feeds. We actually do go to Nigeria. We do go to Democratic Republic of Congo. We are knowledgeable in these different areas. So that, I think, brings, a richness to our material.
I love richness. It's one of my favorite things. Let me have you slow down right there because I know you and I can mind meld and sort of understand what you do. I want to break that down just a little bit and get into, and we don't got to talk specific projects because I know you have certain security requirements. You can't get into those things, but let's just invent a country, that's similar to a situation with Congo, Ukraine. We have these places where we're either trying to be right in front of conflict or we're trying to predict where conflict might be. What kinds of things would you look for? I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to have people on the ground. Hell, I'm at the Hilton at the pool drinking cocktails all day. Like, does that make me effective? No. So what does it look like to be effective, to be ready to go do something and have someone on the ground? What does that mean?
It means that there is a movement of information there. Those networks are being built, those networks that I talked about, and an ability to influence and really define what these communities need to improve the security situation. Again, I love what USAID and State Department do. However, when you start and keep throwing development money against a solution and it just doesn't change, that's when, we take issue that. So it's determining how best to go into these communities. And again, usually through the other 50%, through engaging with women, they will pretty much tell you what's messed up in that arena and how you can improve it, because they're the ones that are primarily interacting within the community. Yeah. They're the ones that are, having to cook and clean and do all of these things.
Right.
And when we talk about terrorist groups like Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab and and ISIL, and again, referring that to women networks, we often overlook the skill sets of women that cook and clean, the logistics piece of it,
Right.
that keep the machine running.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what information do they have? And they may be just in an informal structure. They may not even, they're not in the echelon, in the top levels of the organization. However, bad guys still need to eat.
And I will tell you,
and they still need to have their clothes cleaned.
my experience as a rule, those invisible women are the absolute best spies. They know everything because there's commanders planning the next thing, and they are going to have lunch at some point, and there's absolutely a woman there somewhere involved and in that mix where understanding that she's part of a communication network that literally is invisible. Some of the best reports I've written were about things that were 100% invisible to the command. And someone like that who can be in that room and be disregarded by her own people has incredible information.
And we can talk, we saw it with the IRA. We saw
right.
how the mothers, their sons, that were going out for the cause, whatever side you're on, you don't have to pick a side, but you can still see how influential those mothers were.
Sure, yeah.
In either protecting their sons, feeding their sons, keeping them clothed, providing a safe haven. We saw it in Ukraine with the old grandmothers that were attached to the old, Soviet era. And that's all they've known. That's
right.
how they were brought up. They were brought up under that. So what side do you think they're going to fall under?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what side do you think that they're going to be, helping and passing information? We see it in Libya. You see the mothers are cooking in the kitchen, and the sons are fighting and arguing about issues that are occurring, battles that are being fought, down the street,
Sure.
and who and what they need to do, and all of those different things. I mean, we can just keep going on and on.
On and on and on.
That, like you say, that invisible network.
Right.
It's how do you engage into those networks? And then how do you influence through those networks?
That really is the next element that you have to get into is how do you leverage these things? And not specifically to our advantage, to our strategic goal, okay, but sometimes the right message is not something that we just said. Like, I can't go in, if I'm in a threat-based job and I'm looking for harm, I can't just go into villages and say, where are the bombs? Who are the bad guys? You can't do that. You've got to create this network, then start to make the network work and get information through it. And that often takes time to develop that. And you frequently aren't sending messages that any commander that wants a result right now will ever understand. But to get to the invisible information, to find that seam, to fill those gaps, you've got to have a working system that you can get a message in and out of that makes sense to you. Otherwise, you send a message out, you get nothing back or something back.
Right.
The State Department's really into attributable messages. We have to attribute this message to the government of Somalia or whatever it's going to be. Well, I'm here to tell you that's bullshit. Because why would that work here? Like, we don't believe half the crap we hear in the news anyhow. It makes us mad and angry. We're going to try that program somewhere else. These things happen on the ground. This is where this information is. And if you can create that influence by leveraging your ground network and then go over the top and tweet and create messages. But it has to be rooted in what the reality is on the ground. Otherwise, you're wasting people's time.
Yeah, pretty much.
I wanted to really quick talk about rule of law. I always have a bone to pick with rule of law because it's super important to have rule of law, but it's so bound by culture and context. We can't come in and say rule of law is some guy with a powdered wig who makes a decision with the gavel. That's not rule of law in Ethiopia. That's not how it works. Somalia doesn't really have a penal system. They have that. You absolutely can get in trouble for killing somebody, but you're not going to go to an institutional jail and sit there for 40 years and have 15 appeals. Like, that's just not how it works. So we say rule of law. We've got to understand that the definitions and where we're at are so important so we can know where the work starts. Because the work doesn't start in, let's set up a system of courts. Yes, some of that needs to be done for the big picture thing, but what is possible on the ground? One of my favorite questions to ask when I go to villages is, what level do you guys handle conflict? I already know the answer. It's going to be anything up to and including murder. I already know that. And then I can start to pull out like, well, you have a court system as part of your constitution. Tell me about that. And they're like, bah. And then you tell that to a commander and like, wait a second, it's and are the responses to this rule of law system? But then you don't have a rule of law system. You have whatever system they have in place.
Rule of law, governance, however you, whatever word you want to use. I think you're right. You have to look at what is working within this and what's not working within the region that you're focused on. What I think we've all worked out now that what works here in the United States and is very effective is not necessarily going to work in other places.
Sure.
There might be bits and pieces of it that are more effective. And I think we all come with our own ideas. I mean, how we've been raised originally from Australia. So I have some different perceptions and ideas on how I see rule of law. In Australia, we have a similar, but there's differences.
Sure.
There's some pros and cons of being here in the US as well. But, at the end of the day, I think we have to have a respect for each country on what they choose. Mm-hmm. I think, when you look at Democratic Republic of Congo right now, Kabila has extended the election date. Mm-hmm. So much so that there are people that are upset about it, and rightly so. I mean, it was his father that was in power, and now he's been in power for 2 terms, and he's trying to get a third term approved, and he's done it in a number of ways. Now, when you see it on face value, you're like, oh my gosh, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. But if you read their constitution, mm-hmm. there is some elements within that constitution that would allow for a third term, or the planning of a third term, or to have a vote for a third term. Are we in a position to argue to that?
No, not really.
Right.
No.
So that's where it becomes.
Right.
And then the other side of the coin is, unfortunately, there is a lot of upset people there in Congo right now, mm-hmm. and machetes are starting to come out, and there's a lot of violence.
Right.
You have to mitigate it on that end too, but, you really have to be careful and what side you pick. Be careful, because it may come back to turn on you. We're seeing our own, our own love of democracy here in this country. Mm-hmm. Depending on who you ask, I think that, some people would question that we have a true democracy going on. I think that's the way for most countries that I work in. I think you really have to know what you're talking about, know the country, know their story. I'm a big one on history.
Yeah, right.
Know their story, make some decisions from there. And usually, again, if you start at the local granular level and, mm-hmm. and build your way up, you have people buy in to the system that they create themselves, which I think is key when they own it.
Yes.
I think that's when you're more effective.
And at the granular level, that really is where the work starts. How do we get people to create buy-in here? That's the first question I want to ask, And when I point at the government center, I said, what happens in that building? And the guy says, I don't know. Like, but you're a quarter mile from that building right there with the flag. What's that flag mean? I don't know. Like, okay, come on. Quit putting me on. And the guy's like, all right, I'll tell you what. That guy, Ronnie, or whatever his name is, Ronnie, that guy, he bought a sheep from me and never paid me for it. That guy owes me money. Well, that's where the work starts right there. We now have a bill to pay, figuratively and literally, to that village to create some kind of impact. And there are so many rich tools that you and I both know that you can do. One thing I wanted to ask you, and this is just from my experience, how I've learned, when I've learned my most powerful lessons from me, because we both know, like, there are so many mistakes that we all make, because you bring your own self into these situations.
Sure.
I've put too much of me into a situation. Like I drew up a flag of this village. I'm like, you guys should have something like this flag, like just to have pride and everything. And it felt like this great idea. And, when I look back at it, I'm like, that was dumb. Well, then the guy's like, oh yeah, sure. I'll show all the guys. And all day he's like, hey, Pete made a flag. Look at this thing. And they're all like, what the hell is this guy doing? And I'm like, why did I suggest this flag? Like, that's none of my business, like. It's so easy to fall into these traps where you're like, I'm going to solve this problem. Like that thing is, I don't try to solve the problem. I try to identify it. And then I say to the governor, how do we deal with this? How do I get elders to come here and not bring you complaints, but bring you problems that you guys can work on? Those are the kind of things that I can put myself into is, okay, how do we get to this point, governor? and then work from there, not put myself in. Do you find that that's the mistake you make, maybe? Or what kind of, I don't want to put you in a situation where you're talking negatively about yourself, but when you learn your greatest lessons.
I've got plenty of that.
Because you've been overseas.
We could do a whole nother show on that.
Right.
There was one that I can think of. So I was involved with a medical mission in northern Nigeria. So these doctors were going to be in the area, and there was a marketing, radio programs, the American doctors are coming, no, Nigerian American. This is quite some news, and free medical, and you've had people traveling for days. And I mean thousands of people traveling for days to get to one of these clinics. And we all know that we don't have a capacity to see that many people.
Right.
So you're going to disappoint somebody.
Yes.
Understanding that the mission, it was all donated, it was all based on people's hearts giving, it was all wonderful. But to the people that have traveled 3 days and their child has maybe died of meningitis on the way,
right.
and they're not able to see a doctor. I remember we turned up and there was a young boy, a 10-year-old boy that died right there of meningitis. If you don't see that child, that parent, that mother or father is going to remember that for the rest of their lives as the American doctors came and they did not see me. No one's fault per se, but the perception is there. So how then are we have to be more effective in our messaging. And just that was just one medical mission. Mm-hmm. Again, everyone's intentions were great.
Right, of course. Yeah.
But the messaging was wrong. There was also, I remember on the same mission, the folks at the hospital that worked at the hospital, of course, let their family members know about these services, and they were able to turn up.
Right.
Or get in front of the line. Again, you're not expecting this. So when, you're like, hold on a minute, these people have been waiting for, all day, and then these people just jumped in the line. So how do you, effectively manage those type of situations? If you're not aware of it, and then you're caught off guard. I mean, it's just becoming aware of those different things before you go in. So it's a little bit of pre-assessment and determining how best to deliver your message, your care, whatever it is, because you are going to disappoint somebody.
And just to try to add the clarity to that for the listener, because again, you and I can vibe this and we can feel it, we get it. So someone on we'll say the American side is saying, we helped 800 families. They showed up. What a wonderful success this operation was.
Correct.
All true. And then I'll go out into the village and be like, how'd that go? Because 2 days later, I'm going to go ask that question. And they're going to be like, those motherfuckers. They ignored us. My baby died. My cousin's baby. And it may not even be true anymore because, innuendo is just monster.
Right.
Innuendo and intrigue will undermine the best operation in an instant because the ground truth, the social networks, the females that we never engage well, they're all undermining that one singular mission where you measured an effect of 800 families helped, where you didn't manage expectations, all these problems that you can do. So when we're going to go do something, it's not about the effect of 800 families helped. It's about the affect of what did we create here today? Can we do that again? How do we manage expectations so that we get 200 families? How do we get this message out through the elders so that they say, here are the sickest people within whatever those things, and you're handling it in a more spherical, because we love linear. Like if we do these 15 things on March 15th when we leave, we will win. Like it's spherical. But a lot of times it's a cloud. It's kind of how it looks like. This is a cloud world, and you can't just shoot your arrow through the cloud because you will miss everything. And the cloud will still be there, and the cloud will undermine all of your victories. Okay, so tell us how we learn more about Hayes Group. How do we follow what you're doing, what you're working on? Please come back again because we want to do more with this with you.
I would love to bring friends with me. I have a great team.
Yes.
They would love that. In fact, they would. Yeah. Probably need a couple of sessions with them.
I would love it. I mean, I don't even care if people listen to these shows because I think they're so important to share because the messages are there and this work is highly complex and complicated. But it's, for me, just simple things that you can nail down well. So how do we learn more about Hayes Group? How do we follow you on Twitter and all those things?
Our website, Hayes Group International. It's all one word. We are also on Facebook, Hayes Group International, on Twitter, Other 50%. And I encourage everyone to go and take a look and follow us. We look forward to doing more podcasts and getting our message out there and being able to talk about some of our great projects that we've got coming up. So we look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for coming on. And on John's behalf, who can't be here, thank you. And George, thank you, who's done some
Thank you, George.
audio-visual stuff. We love George. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you.